Awesome. Can you guys hear me okay? Fabulous. All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Christina. I'm one of the senior tutors at Elite Medical Prep. I also do residency advising. A little bit about me, since I think you haven't heard from me yet, but I went to medical school at NYU. And then after that, I'm doing my neurology residency at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, and I am now in my third year. I'll be applying into epilepsy fellowship actually this cycle. So all of these sorts of things are actually very much on my mind. And joining us today, we have a couple of other people. I'll let them introduce themselves as well. Specifically, I think we have Dylan as well.
I'm not sure if Dr. Eiger, is your audio up and running? You want to go ahead and just reintroduce yourself real quick?
Can you all hear me right now? Sorry, I think my connection dropped.
Yep, you're good. Go ahead and just reintroduce yourself for those who might be joining now.
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Dylan Eiger. I'm one of the senior tutor and residency advisors here at Elite. I think I've been at Elite, 5 or 6 years now, but I completed my MD PhD at university, and now I am completing my internal medicine residency at the Brigham and Women's Hospital at Harvard Medical School, and then I will be applying into cardiology fellowship next year.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dylan. All right, so we'll go ahead and kind of go through the plan for today. So here's our agenda. Basically, what we're going to do first is kind of talk about the setup, right? So this is very different than maybe some of the interviews you all did for medical school, especially if those were in person, right? So you want to make sure that you have the appropriate setup. We'll also talk about practice for these. It is extremely suggested that all of you take some time to practice in a format such as this to make sure that you're ready. And then we'll give you kind of some things to think about, the tools that are used, and then what sorts of things that you should be focusing on and have ready before you tackle your first interview. And people always have questions about post-interview communications, so we will touch on that as well. All right, so this is kind of like your basic setup, and it's quite important to kind of think about each of these items individually. So we'll go one by one in terms of the things that you'll be using for your virtual interviews. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is lighting. I feel like in the era of TikTok, people are now well familiar with all the accessories available, but this is so important. You want to have people to be able to see you. You want to be well lit. You want to look professional and put together. Honestly, like everybody's place is different. It may be hard to set up, but I recommend if you can't get in a part of your apartment or wherever you're interviewing that has good lighting, I would get some sort of additional lighting. You can get it on Amazon for about $10, a ring light, or put yourself by the window. You really want to make sure that the people who are speaking with you can see you well. All right, the next thing is the camera. So many people have MacBooks that have little cameras in them or whatever type of computer you have. You don't need to get an extra webcam. You don't need to do anything beyond that. Just make sure that you have a device where you can see yourself and test it out, right? Take a video or have a Zoom call with somebody else and see what you look like too. I would also recommend having a backup like a cell phone with video capability as well. All right, so for audio, something to keep in mind is that AirPods, wireless headphones often will die after a couple of hours. And your interview days, I can speak to neurology often, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you're on video calls. So I do recommend wired headphones or headphones with a battery if you have them. And typically, if you don't use headphones, that's fine. Then you just have to make sure that you're in a very quiet place. Because it's going to really impair the quality of your interview if they cannot hear you. So I would test all of this out. Again, you can get kind of like adapters to get wired headphones and hook them up to your laptop, and you can test all that out ahead of time. All right, environment. So also very important. My formal recommendation, and what I did for my interviews, which were the first cycle of virtual interviews ever done, so there's a lot of trial and error for everybody, is I would put yourself in front of a completely blank canvas. So find a white wall in your apartment or whatever office space you're using and back yourself up to that. If that's not an option, which it might not be for you, you can use virtual backgrounds. Even a virtual white background will suffice. But the idea is that you want to make sure that you look clean, professional. You don't want the people interviewing you to be really distracted by what's going on behind you. Okay. All right, attire. So for everybody who's interviewing, typically they're going to send you out an email ahead of time that will tell you a little bit about what the expectations are. I would say erring on the side of formality is going to be the best thing to do. So that means that for, people of any gender identity, typically it's going to be a suit jacket with a collared shirt underneath. However, some programs may tell you that you will only need to dress business casual, and so a nice blouse will suffice, but just pay attention to the dress code and make sure that you look professional, because this is, at the end of the day, a job interview. It is a very weird, convoluted job interview, but it is a job interview and you want to present as such. Okay, your chair, pretty self-explanatory. Just make sure that you're comfortable. You're going to be in the chair for 8 hours. Possibly. Sometimes interviews span multiple days. So you need to be comfortable. And another thing I will recommend is not having a swivel chair, because there's nothing more distracting than you kind of rocking back and forth as you're speaking with somebody. And I'll tell you that it's really hard to resist doing that if you have one. So just remove the option entirely. All right, your laptop. So it doesn't have to be a laptop. You can also have a desktop computer. Some people have library rooms that they rent out with computers in them where they can do this as well. Any of this is fair game. You just need to make sure you have a computer that you can use that is connected to internet. I'll say you could also use an iPad. You can use a phone. I would recommend against the phone because it can look kind of unprofessional and is hard to study with your hand. And then, as I mentioned previously, you guys want to have a backup plan, okay? So things happen. On my interviews, there was a day where the internet cut out for the person I was interviewing with, and we had to ultimately call each other and do the interview via phone. So just know that they're expected. Technical difficulties are expected. It's not going to reflect poorly on you if your internet cuts out. Everybody knows that this is a possibility with this new era. And so the important thing is to be ready. So make sure that they will typically send out like the phone number of the person interviewing you, or they'll send you a backup link. Make sure you have that information available, the phone number right in front of you, so that if something happens, you can just pick up the phone and call. All right. So Dylan, let me know if you're,
I can actually talk about these slides because I think Dylan's audio connection is a little bit rough right now. And again, for everyone who's joining now, my name is Emily Zielinski. I am currently a fifth-year orthopedic surgery resident at Indiana University, and I have been a tutor and residency advisor at Elite Medical Prep for several years now. So I think all of the things that we've been talking about, and Christina mentioned, are critical to your overall presentation in the virtual interview setting. So this is kind of an example image that Dr. Bruce Rahmer was able to capture for us to kind of demonstrate what not to do. So you want to make sure that you have good lighting, like Christina mentioned. If you don't have good lighting, it's very difficult to see your face and kind of interact with you in the interview setting. Okay. Additionally, in this photo, you can see it's a very cluttered and busy background. We're seeing kind of like a paddle board, a diploma that's covered, a box with some other boxes in it, and shelves that are cluttered. That can be very distracting to interviewers. And so you want to make sure that your background looks neat and professional. You can see that a lot of us today are taking advantage of the virtual background option, which can be appropriate. Although I would say that in general, standing out can be good to show a little bit of your personality, but you probably don't want to conduct your interviews from a virtual background, like at the San Francisco Bridge or something of that nature, because, that's just not very realistic. But if you want to include a tidbit of, your personality behind you, whether that's a plant, or, you know, a guitar or some sort of interesting thing that you kind of put off to the side in the back of your kind of setup. You know, you may find that interviewers will ask you about that, especially if you end up with time at the end of your interview, or it's a mutual shared interest or something that they find interesting. So you can be strategic in that way, but you ultimately want to make sure it is not busy and not cluttered and has the air of professionalism. And then lastly, I think the other thing that people don't think about so much is just face centering in the screen. And so you notice that on this description, or on this example image, we're really only seeing the eyes and nose of Dr. Bruce Raumer. We're not seeing his whole face and his attire. And so you want to make sure that wherever you position your computer, if you have to stack it up on a couple of books or whatever webcam you're using, make sure that you're testing the height at which, you know, your camera is hitting your face, and then how close you are sitting to the camera, to allow for the best view of your face. And then also, you know, you can show your apparel that way if you're kind of dressing with your business casual or your business apparel that's unique to you, although obviously still professional. So those are some important features to consider. Anything else to add, Christina?
No, I don't think so. I think you summarized that perfectly. Just make sure that you're kind of taking a look, and I would say sometimes the blur backgrounds, depending on the platform you're using, you actually might not even have the option to pop in a virtual background. Certainly when I was using Thalamus, that was not available. So that's just why I strongly encourage, as a backup plan, just having a neutral background behind you or positioning yourself as such.
And then on this slide here, we're just kind of demonstrating that ultimately what you can control what the reviewers are, or what the interviewers are seeing, and the rest of your environment does not have to look perfect. So, you know, this is an interesting tweet from a science mom who shared this and kind of showed that the rest of her space is very cluttered, but on screen it looks, you know, perfectly professional. She's dressed for the event on top. I would say that I think from a residency perspective, although it's not comfortable to dress in a suit all day and sit in a chair, you probably should be dressed head to toe in professional apparel in case you inadvertently leave your camera on and you get up to go grab a drink or something in a break, and then, you know, you don't want somebody seeing your like basketball shorts underneath. So I think it's always best to be prepared, but ultimately it doesn't have to look perfect behind you or around you. It just needs to look perfect on screen, what your reviewers are seeing. So I think it's critically important that you know, test this. If you have the Zoom application or you have WebEx, even if that's not what application you're going to use, just open it and start a meeting so that you can see what the interviewers are going to see.
All right, so I can pick up here. So I think something important to remember, and I see a question about Thalamus. We will talk about that on one of the upcoming slides. Practice is critical. And specifically, like Dr. Zielinski said, what you want to be doing is putting together your entire setup, because I can tell you from personal experience, you may have a different set of headphones and your computer may not default to that. You may have a different camera, your computer may not default to that. It may look way different than you think it will. And so it's really important to have a really good understanding of how you are presenting to the people that you will be interviewing with. So our school offered virtual interviews. Elite Medical Prep also offers residency advising with virtual interviews in that process, if that is something you're interested in. But I also recommend just talking to friends, talking to family. I did an interview basically with my family members, set up my entire setup, and they recorded me. And then I watched back what it looked like and how the audio quality was, what the video quality was, if there was anything distracting. So it's really important to practice this. And I think another thing that's hard to do when you have kind of a chat box to the right and a link to the left and maybe an extra monitor is to focus on the camera. But remember, you're talking to somebody, and if you're looking down or looking away the whole time, it won't look like you're talking to them. So do your best. No one's perfect at looking at the camera or as close in a direction to the camera as you can, so it appears like you're speaking directly to the person that you're interviewing with. Something else extremely important is to be cognizant of when your mic is on and off and when your camera is on and off, okay? And as Dr. Zielinski says, I strongly advise wearing a full suit the entire day. I have heard horror stories of people not being aware of when their cameras are on, and it can be really detrimental. And like she said, it's good to kind of set yourself apart, but that's not how you want to set yourself apart on the interview trail. And so make sure that you're keeping in mind these sorts of things. You can use the space bar when you're on Zoom to kind of turn the mic on and turn the mic off. So that's a helpful shortcut, but every platform is slightly different. So just be aware of all of the different features, make sure your audio settings and your video settings are correct, and make sure that you double check your camera if you're getting up or going somewhere and you don't want people to see what's around. And then just make sure you're practicing how you speak with other people, your tone. Try to be engaged and energetic throughout this time. I know it's a long day and you may be exhausted, but this is kind of your one shot to show them how excited you are about the program and you really want to convey that. And I'll tell you, it's much harder to do that over a virtual platform than it is in person. So you may have to kind of amp up some of these features of nonverbal communication to really get that across. And then here's a nice example here from Dr. Eiger about what he had for his setup. And, you know, I can tell you I had a very similar thing. I just had a notepad right beneath me, and I had kind of key things and questions that I wanted to ask the interviewers. I had the schedule of all of the people I was going to meet with, the times I was going to meet with them, and things that I was curious about and things that I didn't want to forget to tell them. And so I really do recommend this. So you'll make sure that you get really good questions in. You'll make sure that you use your opportunity with this interviewer to make sure that they know what you want them to know about you. So now we'll kind of touch on some of the platforms that are available. So everybody's kind of asking what the format for the interview is. So I'll just say that it's variable, and that's kind of why we put this slide together. So the most common format is going to be Zoom. I think it's at this point, especially several years after the pandemic, it's the most smooth and widely used platform. And so for most people, and at least when I interviewed, and I'm not sure, Dr. Eiger, if you have the same experience, but most people will be using the Zoom platform. So if that's something, you can get a free account on the internet. It will only take, you don't get like all of the premium features, but you will be able to test out everything in Zoom, just as you would on your interview day. I'll go to Thalamus next, just because there's a little bit of concern about that one. And I think it's probably one of the less intuitive platforms. So Thalamus is this web browser application, and they will send you a link ahead of time for your interviews to this platform. You'll log in, and then within this web browser, you will log in and you will conduct your interviews. It's the same thing where you'll select your audio source, you'll select your video source. There's some little buttons here and there to basically test out all of these different features, but you're probably not going to have it set up ahead of time. So you really should go into the meeting early on Thalamus, test everything, make sure everything works before your interviewer joins you. Microsoft Teams is also very common. It's similar to Zoom. Like I said, there's slight idiosyncrasies. For both Zoom and Thalamus, you will probably have the option of a virtual background. For Zoom and Teams. For Thalamus, I do not think you will. So just keep that in mind when you're interviewing on that platform. Teams is very similar to Zoom, same sort of functionality. Blue Jeans is kind of fading out, but another video conferencing software. It does have blur background features. And for Google, you also have Google Meet. I didn't really see this used as much during my experience, but it is certainly an option and maybe a backup for you all. That you can also access by just creating a Google account for free and logging in and seeing what it looks like. The last one is WebEx. I have not seen anybody use this in my interview, but this is one of the original video conferencing softwares. This, you would have to download the app and kind of take a look and log in and set up everything before you have your event. So in general, for all of these platforms, log in early, configure your settings early, always show up about 15 minutes before you have to be at any given virtual interview to make sure that there aren't any snafus, and so that you can troubleshoot unexpected things that may happen. And I will pass it back to Dr. Zielinski for this next slide.
I'm gonna let Dr. Eiger take this, actually. I think he's back online.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Sorry, I lost my internet connection. Stuff like this happens, so try to avoid it when you're interviewing. I think so we put together this checklist just to help you remember kind of all the important things prior to your first interview day. As we talked about, make sure you have the right setup, test all of your equipment, and then also have a backup plan. Should everything fail, the electricity in your house go out, there's weather, how are you going to deal with that? So just be prepared for worst case scenario. Have all of your links available. As you saw in the previous slide, I like to have sticky notes around my screen that are readily available. So if I need to contact someone about a technical, or if I need to find the next video conferencing room, it's all readily available. As we just mentioned, test out your the video conferencing application before the interview day if you can. If you can't do it before, log on a few minutes early to make sure everything's set up and your audio and video working correctly. Silence all your devices and make sure you know what silence actually means. Sometimes, at least, I'm an iPhone user. If I just turn my phone, my ringer off, I can still get some notifications through. There are some people have settings where they want to silence everything but except phone calls. So make sure you know that when you put your phone on silent, what that actually means. Research who you're interviewing with is a really an important one, but it's something I want to stress that you may not know who you're interviewing until the second they walk in. For me, I applied to some physician scientist training programs. I was told I was going to be interviewing with the scientists in advance, so it was important for me to know what kind of science they do. But often you may not know who you're going to be interviewing with, so be prepared with some generic questions that you could ask really anyone. But also feel free to develop questions as the interview is just rolling along. That kind of just segues into the next bullet point. I think it's really important to have some questions ready in terms of the answers. So there are very common questions that you're going to be asked. We here at Elite can help you prepare for those. And those are some things that you can have in sticky notes as well if you're not the best public speaker and you want to remind yourself. And then the last one, which I think is really important, is have questions ready. I think, when I interview students for medical school, I was sometimes upset when they would ask me questions that they could look up, like what's the size of your program or what kind of social events or networking events do you have throughout the year, because a lot of that if you put the time and effort into the interview beforehand, you can figure it out on your own. So I think it's really nice for you to ask questions that are that make the interviewer think, have a little bit of introspection, but also you want to make sure your questions are not phrased in a way that's negative. So the reason I mention that in particular is because commonly you'll hear students ask, what are things that you'd like to change about the program? And I think that's a good question because you want to know, how can the program improve? But it's framed in a way that's just talking about the negatives of the program. So simply by rewording it and saying, hey, you're the program director, what are your goals for the next 5 years? Where do you see the program going? Is a positive way to kind of ask the same question. So again, always keep things on a positive light, even if you want to learn about the shortcomings of the program. And then this is a really important slide and one that we get asked about a lot, and that's regarding post-interview communication. Now, just forewarning, I think a lot of this is not only specialty specific, but very much program dependent. And I think at least in internal medicine, I'd like to hear others in terms of neurology and orthopedics in terms of how the programs approached it. But at least in internal medicine, almost every program had some policy. And most of the times these policies were explicit in saying, this is what post-interview communication with us can look like. For many programs, it was, we're not going to respond to you unless you have a question. So if you send us a thank you email, we don't care. We're not going to respond to it. But if you have a question about the call schedule or something else like that, we'll answer those questions. As the second bullet says, questions are always welcome, but don't feel like you need to email them with a question to show that you're interested. By showing up to the interview, they know that you're interested, and they're really going to base the majority of their decision on your performance on interview day. once you get near the end of the interview season and you've started to figure out your list, if you know your top program, it is in your favor to tell them that you are ranking them number one. It can help programs make their rank list when they know who wants to come, but it's important you only tell one program. It is very inappropriate that if you tell multiple programs that you're ranking them number one, and then you don't match there, if that program has ranked you to match. While you may not see like the immediate downside of this, you'll soon learn that every specialty in medicine is very small, and people will know each other at the other institutions, and the word can spread fast. So it's in your best interest to not tell multiple programs you're ranking them number one. And the last one, which is very difficult to do, but don't read into post-interview communication very much. You may be getting some emails from people just saying, hey, we're reaching out to see if you had any other questions, and you may say, oh my gosh, they're clearly very interested in me, but that may be a generic email they're sending to everyone. So I think you can sometimes get more explicit post-interview communication that is either positive or negative, but on the whole, I think it's better for you to not think too much about the post-interview communication. Don't read into the tone or diction of these emails you'll be getting, and just try your best on interview day. And then once you think you found your best fit, I think it's in your best interest to tell them if you truly know what your number one program is.
Okay, we've gotten to the end of this session. We're a little bit over time, but luckily we have a open Q&A session. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause this recording, and then we're going to